Hello everyone, I'm Darlene Ajay, and in today's video, I will be presenting a study on sustainably developing the Marianas into a multi-island integrated destination. I've presented the findings of the same study in two different videos, each focused on Tinian and Rota respectively, and today's video will be focused on Saipan. In the past, while I've mentioned that the opportunities to really develop the Marianas into a multi-island destination that could set it apart from main competitors such as Guam, which only has one island, but these opportunities really lie within the lesser developed islands. For example, Rota, Tinian, and the Northern Islands. Many of these islands have very unique assets that are perfect for the development of premium facilities that host very unique experiences that could truly elevate the positioning of the Marianas as a multi-island destination that offers a variety of different experiences to upmarket guests. With that said, Saipan is always going to be the island that has the bulk of inventory for the Marianas. It has the majority of existing facilities, tourist amenities, as well as activities. And it is the hub of the Marianas. So it is critical for the Marianas to succeed as a multi-island destination that facilities in Saipan and its accommodation options be revitalized to take the destination into the new travel era. And today we're going to be looking at some recommendations on how to do so. First, let's take a look at the current and historical situation and what it means for the destination. In terms of accommodation facilities, the table here shows the 9 shoreline properties and 2 inland properties that are still operating that are part of HAMI. We're looking at just over 2,500 guest rooms. In addition to this, there's about 1,200 guest rooms that are smaller inland budget to mid-tier facilities located on Saipan. And out of the 35 properties that make up this 1,200 rooms, only 7 of them have more than 50 rooms. So these are really small scale properties. And in addition to all these, it's important not to forget that there are several properties which are non-operational at the moment, but they do take up prime shoreline sites. So from the perspective of making the best use of the island's prime real estate, it's important that these projects be utilized and be operated in its best use case in the future. And this is amongst these 4 projects is a total of about 1,000 guest rooms. So this takes the total inventory on Saipan to nearly 5,000 rooms. Let's take a look at the performance of these properties. For the HAMI set of hotels, for an extended period of 7 years, occupancy performance was very strong, in the mid-80s to high 80s and sometimes surpassing 90%. During the same period, even though ADR experienced considerable growth, going up to about $150, given how strong occupancy was, how strong the booming demand was in the market, that allowed for the market to be at near capacity levels for an extended period, there could have been stronger growth in ADR. And this is hindered by 2 factors. 1, the older facilities in the market, and 2, limited brand representation in Saipan. And we can see these 2 factors from this table here when we compare Saipan's performance to 15 other destinations. For example, here for ADR, compared to Guam, for example, Guam's ADR in 2019 was $213, and islands of Hawaii averaged around $250, with Kauai leading at $283. All of these islands, the majority of their key shoreline properties are branded under established global resort brands. Also, even though a lot of these resorts were similar to Saipan, first developed in the 1970s and 1980s, they've undergone numerous rounds of renovation and redevelopment to ensure that the facilities are competitive and that their revenue generating potential is maximized. Apart from the accommodation facilities, Saipan is also home to the majority of existing attractions and tourism facilities in the Marianas. And that includes, for example, Managaha Island, tours up in Marpi, lots of snorkeling and diving opportunities, and the availability of cafes, restaurants, and shops in central Garapan. Overall, Saipan's biggest strength is that it already has a good basis of accommodation inventory as well as tourism facilities that could be improved upon. The key shoreline properties are all sizable properties that are located on great oceanfront sites. And a lot of the tourism amenities, along with the resorts, even though they are older, Saipan's key attractions and resorts really achieved very good online reviews relative to the age of these facilities. And what's been highlighted as some of the best attributes are the natural beauty and service. So it's really Saipan has a good basis to be working with going into the future. On the other hand, a lot of the accommodation products are dated and they're really in need of crucial revamping. There are also a number of underutilized sites that could be looked at in terms of maximizing the revenue potential for the island's prime real estate. Also, like I mentioned, there is a lack of internationally established brands, with the Hyatt Regency previously being the only branded property until the securing of the Crown Plaza brand. And there really is a need for more brand representation in the Marianas. That could also help to strengthen the destination's identity over time. Because the market was mostly dominated by wholesale demand, there's a lot of opportunities in terms of growing the FIT market or the free independent traveler markets. There are also many untapped submarkets within the Asia Pacific region. For instance, the expatriate community in the region. And these are expats, North Americans, Europeans, Australians that live and work in Asia. And Saipan and the Marianas is available to these guests in terms of regional connectivity and location. But in order to attract these guests and in order to get a higher percentage of the FIT market, Saipan needs more competitive facilities and needs regionally competitive facilities that could compete with the amount, with the large availability of modern resorts that have been built in the last decade that are branded and are offered at value for money prices in Southeast Asia, for example. It needs to be competitive. And the upcoming lease renewals of a lot of Saipan's key shoreline properties present the ideal opportunities to introduce global brands and to renovate to make sure that facilities are improved and are competitive and help the destination. And over time, as tourism grows, new job opportunities could help to encourage retention of the younger generation in the longer term. On the other hand, without significant upgrade, it's going to be highly challenging for Saipan to remain competitive, particularly outside of the wholesale segment. Any establishments or new developments that lack a long-term interest in the destination could also impact the quality of life for its residents. And along the same lines, looking at past developments, there's comparatively less development in facilities and projects that benefit both tourists and the local community. And going forward in the recommendations, as I will be emphasizing, there is a need to balance developments that benefit only the tourists versus ones that could be enjoyed by tourists as well as the local residents. Now let's take a look at the recommendations. Saipan is envisioned to become the improved hub of the Marianas. And in the context of being the improved hub, I've used here General in Fiji as an example to illustrate some of its developments before we go into the recommendations for Saipan. Similar to Saipan, General was developed in the 1970s and 1980s And it's really the most established and most mature cluster of properties that's closest to the point of entry Nandi Airport for Fiji. And it has the largest concentration of resorts and inventory. So it shares a lot of similarities with Saipan. And we can see from this table here, there's 7 large resorts, all of them with international brands attached. And we can see, for example, the Sofitel, the Sheraton, and the Wyndham here, as well as the Hilton and the Westin. And all of these 7 resorts opened with international brands attached to them. In addition to the resorts, there's also a commercial complex with cafes, restaurants, shops, and tour operators that operate day trips out to the outlying islands. There's also an 18-hole golf course and a marina. If we look at tourism growth in Fiji, it really took off in the last 10 years and reached 890,000 arrivals in 2019. And the figures here to look at are that more than 40% of visitors to Fiji are repeat travelers. There are also more than 50% of visitors from the free independent traveler segment. And as I mentioned, these are guests who are typically more upmarket and are more willing to pay for the right product. They've also received stable demand from the traditional source markets of Australia and New Zealand, which make up the bulk of their demand, more than 60% of their demand, but are developing supplementary markets like North America at about 13%, China, Europe, and Japan. And if we go back to looking at General, even though all the properties are branded, they were developed in the 70s and 80s and have older facilities. And in terms of performance, even though occupancy has been consistently strong in the mid 70s to 80s, what they suffered most on was ADR. And prior to the renovation of a lot of its key properties, ADR performance was below $150. And for Fiji, even though a lot of its most iconic properties are located on the more remote islands, the bulk of their inventory is really still on the main island, and General is the most high profile area in terms of having the most number of resorts. So the government of Fiji, being a key investor in the area, recognized the importance of General, and they really took efforts to spearhead the revitalization of the area. Over the last several years, there's been full upgrade of the key properties, the Sofitel, Sheraton, Westin, and Wyndham. And the full upgrade of these facilities really improved their revenue generating potential. And we can see that in the ADR performance that increased from about $140 in 2016 to $175 in 2019 on average. And the key properties that have been renovated in General are looking at ADR levels of $170 to $200. In addition to the renovation of key properties in General, the government of Fiji, the Fiji National Fund, really spearheaded new developments in the country that are branded and are high quality, and more importantly, they're purpose driven. So in 2009, they opened the 266-room Intercontinental Natadala Bay at one of the most beautiful beach sites on the main island. It's an iconic property, and it successfully introduced guests to a new area of Fiji that was previously not really known on the travel map. So by introducing the Intercontinental brand, a beautiful iconic property, they're really trying to shift tourism to this area of the country. In 2017, they opened the 250-room Marriott Moby Bay. And with this development, what they did was they introduced the over-the-water bungalows, which were previously only available on the more remote island, smaller properties. So this is the first property of scale that offered this type of product on the main island. Once again, bringing the main island's offerings to a new height. In 2018, they welcomed the Six Senses brand to a 48-hectare site on a remote island, and this is the first remote island property under a global brand. Previously, although there were lots of iconic remote island properties under Fijian brands that have also become very established, this is the first niche global brand they introduced for an island property. And in 2020, the Fiji National Fund announced that the Grand Pacific Hotel in Suva, which first opened in 1914 and is one of the most iconic properties in the country, is going to reopen in 2022 after an extensive renovation as another intercontinental property. And really, this is going to drastically change the offerings in Suva. So Nadi and Suva are the two main areas on the Fiji mainland, and Suva has always lagged behind Nadi in terms of its tourism offerings. And I think this, the opening of the Intercontinental, the rebranding of this iconic property is really going to help change that. And as we can see with these 4 example developments, that the direction of development's been clear. And with each development, they're introducing something new to the market or trying to improve the product offerings of a certain area, that these are very much purpose-driven developments. And this is, once again, something that I think could be a key takeaway for Saipan going forward. So the general rationale to transform Saipan is to turn it into a high quality, lively resort destination with upgraded facilities, amenities, but still with a natural charm that's been lost to many overdeveloped islands. And the overall goal is to revitalize, starting with the upgrading and branding of existing facilities. And that includes existing hotels, including the key shoreline properties, and also applies to attractions, shops, roads, walkways, and public facilities. And it's very encouraging to see earlier in the video how much is already been done and how much is ongoing in terms of revitalizing the island's facilities, beginning with the public facilities and really revamping the facilities that benefit not only tourists, but also the residents. And it's going to improve the overall outlook for the island. And I think this is really something very encouraging as Saipan moves into the new cycle. And following that, looking at the redevelopment and or cleanup of some of the unfinished or disused developments. And this includes previous hotels, unfinished projects or shopping malls, or beginning with larger and the more obvious ones that's taking up more prime shoreline locations. And looking at the future, ensuring that any new development is of high quality, and it's completely in line with the island's overall positioning and achieves best use of site, and more importantly, adds value to the destination by meaningfully introducing globally established brands and operators, really adding to the offerings. And all of this is intended to achieve a scale and level of quality that's going to be attractive to experienced leisure travelers and incentive groups. When compared to the historical market mix, Saipan has the potential to achieve a higher percentage of FIT and incentive groups with improved products and the introduction of global brands. And ultimately, the goal is to increase Saipan's overall tourism revenue by increasing spending per visitor rather than just focusing on the volume of visitors. And let's look at the accommodation components to begin with. The number 1 priority is the upgrading and branding of existing shoreline resorts. And like I said, in the case of Saipan, there's already a large amount of facilities that's existing. And the most important goal now is to really make the best use of what is already there. And even though I've looked at, I've shown examples for destinations like Guam, like Kauai, like Fiji, where the renovation of older properties really helped to improve ADR levels and to help achieve maximum revenue generating potential for a property. There's an example right in Saipan, and all of you are there today at the beautiful Kensington Resort. I think with the newest quality facility in the market, its rate performance is really done well, even though it doesn't have a location right in the center of Garapan, that having the newest quality facilities has really made a big difference for this property. And I think that's going to be something for all the older properties going forward in terms of going into redevelopment and looking at introducing global brands. And I've done a separate study on the benefit of branding from the perspective of the destination as well as for its individual developers. And really a lot of it is about improving the overall accommodation offering that's going to lead to higher revenue and higher tax for the destination and attracting higher yielding visitors, but also reaching a bigger global customer base. By accessing the worldwide reservation networks and loyalty programs of these global brands, Saipan could diversify its nationality mix and reduce market-specific risks. And when it goes into a positive cycle, it would be able to attract higher caliber developers and avoid less credible ones, overall managing the risks associated with competing destinations and ensuring that prime sites are optimized. Thereby increasing the longer term value of the hotel assets for the destination, but also for the individual developers. And it's really mutually beneficial to the destination and to its investors to look at introducing more hotel brands to the destination. Following that is to look at achieving best use of the properties that are taking up prime real estate on the island, but are not operational at the moment. And following that, making sure that any new developments are of high quality. And how is that quality shown? And I think it's starting with the development having an experienced developer and having a global brand attached to it. A lot of times branding under leading hotels, hotel groups, really they offer the expertise, they offer brand value, and they also offer the experience to help vet the legitimacy of investors, which in a lot of cases, because they've done thousands, hundreds of thousands of projects globally, it really, they have the experience to be looking at which investors are going to take the project through. Aside from having a brand, it's looking at projects, whether it's realistic to execute in terms of scale, in terms of market demand in the future, and in terms of labor requirements, both during the construction period as well as during the operating term. And lastly, making sure that any new development sustainably and meaningfully add to the offerings for the Marianas, that it takes the product offerings to a new level and introduces something meaningful to the market. And talking about new developments, let's look at the overall inventory level for Saipan. From an updated list of projects that are under planning, there appears to be around 1,400 rooms that are amongst 4 projects still planned for Saipan. And if we look at the existing inventory, we looked earlier adding up the Hami properties, the currently non-operational shoreline properties, and about half of the inventory of the inland properties. We're going to be looking at about 4,100 rooms. And for this 4,100 rooms, if we look at a room night demand to visitor arrival ratio of the Hami competitive set, in 2011, this ratio was 1.67, and it's been downward trend that so it went down to about 1.3 in 2018. Looking at the future, if we take a generous 30% increase to this ratio, we're going to be needing 700,000 arrivals to achieve 75% occupancy just for the 4,100 guest rooms that are in the upmarket set we've identified here. And in order to achieve this 30% growth in terms of room night demand to visitor arrival ratio, we really need to achieve a longer average length of stay. And this could only come from improvements to Saipan and the success of establishing a multi-island destination. And at the same time, there needs to be limited increase in supply outside of this market set. However, if we're looking at a much larger future room inventory, there's going to be a need to significantly increase the number of visitors and or result in lower occupancy for the market. So in terms of the overall inventory, I would say that it's really about focusing on what's existing in the market in terms of the key shoreline properties, as well as the ones that are not operating at the moment, and some of the key inland properties, and making the best use out of what's already there, considering that there are limited resources on the island in terms of additional sites, as well as natural resources and labor. So the best efforts should be put towards in improving and making the best use of what's existing in the market to improve the revenue potential. Moving on to looking at attractions. Given that Saipan is home to the majority of residents in the Marianas, I think it's important to keep some areas more resident-centric. And that means developing a number of key signature attractions that become key revenue generators for the island, thereby being able to keep some areas more resident-centric. So in terms of the beach resources, in addition to Managaha, perhaps looking at additionally actively managing snorkel or dive sites and or beaches. And this is going to give tourists more to experience than Managaha and Micro Beach. And at the same time, given that tourists are already visiting these areas, it could mean better management and maintenance, and also additional revenue that could be put towards these efforts. And so preserving the environment and generating revenue at the same time that could be put towards the management and preservation efforts. And as an example development, I've done a study that looks at turning Marpi into a signature sustainable integrated attraction. So building on what Marpi is already offering at the moment naturally and culturally, and tying it all together, giving it more of an identity that showcases the beauty and heritage of the Marianas, and turn it really into a signature attraction that adds meaningfully to the destination for tourists, but also becomes an amenity for residents. So a lot of, for example, the biking trails, the walking trails, that's recommended for Marpi, and revitalization of the area, the cleanup of the, introducing the Bird Island Beach. All of this is going to benefit the residents as well. And also the educational component, having an exhibition on the natural ecosystem in Marpi, and also on the cultural background. It's going to become an asset that school groups could use, and it's an educational component that could be enjoyed by generations to come. So as an example development, this is really looking at how to make the best use of what is already offered by nature. And actively managing it, actively managing the experience so that revenue could be generated from these efforts to continue sustainably taking the attractions into the future. And this applies to the lifestyle amenities as well, being that it shouldn't just be a touristic focus, that it should be for residents to enjoy as well. Starting with the revitalization of Garapan. A lot of the shops, restaurants in Garapan are geared towards tourists, but I think a lot more could be introduced so that residents could also enjoy these facilities. And that involves moving beyond central Garapan and taking it to different areas that could also be used for community event spaces. And I know that just not so long ago, for July 4th, there was beautiful firework at Garapan Fishing Base. And this is a great example of a community event space that could be enjoyed by everybody, but also by tourists as well. And from the pictures here, you can see. And that leads to, in terms of the restaurant options, food and beverage options, and retail options, what's offered in Saipan at the moment is once again more geared towards tourists, whether it's souvenirs or previously at DFS, the more luxury brands. And what's missing are really high street brands and off-price brands, both for retailers and food and beverage outlets. These are going to be popular with tourists, but also it can also become amenities for the residents. And the brands that I've shown here, for example, are already in Guam. So it is realistic for them to be in Saipan with the right development. And I think going forward with developments in terms of amenities, it's really about appealing to tourists, but also having ones that would appeal to residents as well. And this also applies to critical amenities for getting around. I think introducing a pay-as-you-go bike system and introducing a shuttle system are going to be critical for tourism arrivals to grow beyond the previous levels, to really looking at actively managing traffic conditions and introducing more sustainable options that once again could be enjoyed by tourists and residents alike. And we'll now move on to look at Tinian, Rota, and the Northern Islands before tying it up all together to look at issues with a multi-island destination. So for Tinian, it's ideal to be a day trip getaway for the Marianas, and that's driven by several things. Number one, the large planned military component makes it less ideal in the traditional tourism development sense. But given its vicinity to Saipan and the abundance of natural and cultural resources, it's really ideal for Tinian to develop day trip attractions that could greatly add to the activities component for the Marianas. In order for this to take place, it would be critical to resume a scheduled ferry service from Saipan that was not only serving tourists, but also a key amenity for residents and a key thing that helped with the transport of equipment and supply as well. And to also keep the flights that are from Saipan at the moment, making sure that convenient schedules are maintained, especially during the ramp up and establishment period for Tinian as a day trip destination. It might be necessary to be looking at subsidies, particularly for the ferry service. That it would be critical to maintain schedule regardless of demand, particularly in the ramp up period, in order for Tinian to be established as a reliable day trip option for tourists. And additionally to the scheduled ferry service and flights from Saipan, there could be opportunities to explore more creative options with a helicopter, maybe seasonal fishing excursions from Saipan to Tinian. And with the access requirements sorted, in the immediate term, it's about returning to fundamentals and really build upon Tinian's existing natural and cultural assets to tap into the guest base of the hundreds of thousands of guests that were arriving in Saipan to the Marianas each year. And packaging what Tinian has to offer with a round-trip ferry and developing 3 signature attractions that would be the House of Taga, turning it into a more interactive experience by introducing a visitor center, by reconstructing some of the latte stone villages from the existing stones and recreating a story and showcasing the lives of the Chamorro ancestors back then, really incorporating a story and component to the attraction and making it more into a interactive experience. Also having exploration walking trails at Punta Carolinas and developing Taga Beach into a signature facility with a F&B outlet that's going to become a postcard sunset spot, not only for Tinian, but for the Marianas as well. And in addition to the 3 signature attractions, further developing Tinian's success with hosting festivals, with the success of the Pica Festival, and make it the festival island of the Marianas to supplement with great local cuisine as well as sporting events. And I'm so happy to learn that there's going to be beef festival in Tinian next month. I think it's really, moving forward in terms of making best use of what it has to offer, local cuisine and its success with hosting festivals and moving towards making it the festival island of the Marianas. And in addition to that, looking at options to introduce tours to Northfields, depending on access at the time, and making Northfields more themed around peace and theming it as a peace attraction rather than talking about the event that made it famous and making it more universally accessible. And lastly, in the longer term, to look at options for Goat Island adventures and packaging all this together into a day trip business model that makes it really ideal for guests staying on Saipan to easily visit Tinian and see something different that the multi-island destination has to offer. And then in terms of a longer term, to look at generating more overnight demand. So as these quality attractions make Tinian a popular day trip attraction, many people might wish to stay overnight, which could trigger development of smaller owner-operated facilities. And as sufficient demand builds up, investors could be looking at more sizable resort developments. For example, an upper mid-tier branded resort property that's beachfront and really focus on a fun recreational component. Let's take a look at Rota. Beginning with the guiding rationale of preserving the pristine environment and charms of the small community while improving the island's economy and the lives of residents by hosting sustainable, responsible, and community-based tourism. Given that the natural beauty of Rota is one of its key advantages, preservation of the environment is going to be critical to sustain its uniqueness. And in terms of this uniqueness, Rota offers the perfect setting for a return to nature experience that's targeted at the premium end of the market. It should be able to offer an upmarket experience that also emphasizes the harmonious relationship between the residents and the visitor experience. And this ties in perfectly with Rota's reputation as the friendly island and as nature's treasure island, offering community-based tourism, which means small-scale tourism that is sustainable and allows the visitors to not only see the destination on the surface, staying at posh resorts, but also it's for upmarket guests who want to know about the lives of residents, who want to know about the way of living, living in harmony with nature. It would be offered at the premium end, targeting a smaller amount of upmarket guests, once again, that are after more meaningful experiences, and Rota has the perfect setting to offer this. In terms of accommodation, the most ideal would be to offer small-scale accommodation that offers a personalized experience. These, as you can see from the pictures, these are small-scale properties that are often developed organically by passionate owner-developers. They're typically under 50 rooms, sometimes much smaller, bungalow-style rooms. And usually they're on very unique sites that are spectacular. And the design, the concept is really built around the site. It's typically harmonious with nature and is built around nature and is self-sufficient in operations, meaning that they're not going to be adding additional stress on the local infrastructure. This type of property is usually very unique, and it is something that's very popular with upmarket guests, particularly those looking for a rustic luxury experience. And it's going to be a new type of product that previously wasn't available to the Marianas. In terms of attractions, given the relatively compact size of Rota and the high concentration of scenic spots relative to its size, Rota really has the perfect opportunity to target a premium positioning and have the entire island be welcoming for guests to explore on their own. And this is going to be a luxury that's rarely available at typical resort destinations. Given that Rota really is a mosaic of the Marianas heritage, that it has some form of relic from every ethnicity or culture that has had a significant influence on the Marianas. This is a perfect opportunity to feature the island as a reserve park. There will be plenty of opportunities to offer different experiences, whether it's walks through the forest with lots of information offered along the way for people to see wildlife, for example, samba deer and the bird sanctuary, as well as guided coastal walks. That is the perfect opportunity to offer education on the marine ecosystem, to use Rota's pristine environment as a backdrop to shed light on this topic that is becoming more and more important globally. Living in harmony with nature is another topic that could be explored, whether it's about guests having the opportunity to visit sustainable fishing practices or having an experiential visit to family-run farms. All these are potential activities that could be explored on Rota, and for guests to really be immersed in the island and be able to explore. And to tie all of this together, an ideal attraction would be to develop a heritage bike trail that connects most of the iconic lookout areas, cultural sites, historical relics, and scenic spots on Rota. That's going to become the best way to experience all that Rota has to offer. Imagine being able to bike around the island and to experience different parts of the island, whether it's the water or the forest or the historic sites. It encourages guests to explore at a more leisurely pace, thereby lengthening the average length of stay. So for the premium guests that are staying at small, unique properties, to really slow down and be able to experience Rota at a slow pace. And this is something that is also going to be beneficial to all the residents on Rota, something that is going to improve their quality of life as well. So Rota really offers the perfect opportunity to introduce a product that's new to the Marianas and could open up the multi-island destination to more upmarket guests. And continue on from that to have even greater discovery in terms of the adventure of travel is the Northern Islands. And the drastic and dramatic scenery of the Northern Islands and the fact that very few people have been there really offers the true luxury of discovery and could become a signature experience of the Marianas, showing the true uniqueness of the destination. Given the fact that there's limited infrastructure on the Northern Islands at the moment, a liveaboard product in the medium term is going to be the most ideal way to open up tourism in the Northern Islands and to allow a small amount of guests at the top end of the market who are real adventurers or special occasion guests to experience the Northern Islands, to put the Northern Islands on the travel map, and then in the longer term to explore potential for more permanent facilities. Now, looking at this liveaboard product, it really started in the Maldives as a dive product for a dive boat. It's for typically a small group of around 20 guests. They live on the boat for a period of 6, 7, 8 nights and go around different parts of the Maldives, mainly diving during the day. But it's develops way beyond that, and it's become very popular with upmarket or luxury travel groups. And this is whether it's executive retreats, as you can see in the picture, or it's also become very popular with younger Asian guests, smaller groups of friends traveling together. And this is really something that the Northern Islands has the perfect setting, once again, to host this type of experience. The liveaboard product in terms of accommodation will be on a mid-scale yacht in the 30-meter range that offers 8 to 10 cabins, and also a common indoor areas, common dining area, and also outdoor areas on the deck, as well as sleeping quarters for the crew, and sufficient storage for snorkeling and diving equipment, food and beverages for the entire trip, any equipment that they need set up for dining on the islands. All of that will be stored on the yacht itself. And the majority of the guest time will be spent on the yacht when they're sleeping, and also most of the meals. But some of the highlights of this product or this trip is the dining experiences that are set up on land. And it could be whether it's a beach barbecue or it's a picnic lunch on a remote island, or sunset drinks also on the island. These are really special opportunities to make the experience very memorable. But apart from that, the real adventure is really in exploring the Northern Islands. And there's so many different activities that could be explored, including visiting the black sand beach on Pagan, doing lots of activities on the lake in Pagan, having hiking opportunities, through the forest, around the volcano, hiking up the volcano, and of course, diving and snorkeling opportunities all around the different islands. So the typical itinerary would be sailing at night from one island to the next, and then docking where appropriate during the day, so that guests could have these activities. And apart from sleeping on the yacht, there could be opportunities to look at, in the more immediate term, self-contained glamping facilities, whether it's a tent or a trailer. And then in the future, as demand builds up, when the live abroad product gets established and the Northern Islands become more established on the travel map, there could be opportunities to look at permanent facilities. Like an example here is a tented camp in South Africa. And I think in terms of the setting, it looks perfect for the lake on Pagan. So something like this that is really at the luxury end of the market and appeals to a small group of travelers, but could become the postcard signature experience for the Marianas that really sets it apart from any other destination. And now let's tie everything together. We'll look at development issues for each island, beginning with access requirement. Of course, all the tourism products that I mentioned today, the success of these is all contingent on access. And that begins with access to the Marianas via Saipan. And the key is having, of course, daytime scheduled flights to key cities in Asia, whether it's on flag carriers or low-cost carriers. The key is to have schedules that make it more convenient, daytime versus red-eye flights, for example, and maintaining daily scheduled flights with Guam. When it comes to access as a topic, it's been an age-long debate whether it's a chicken or egg situation, but access to any island destination worldwide is the lifeline for a destination. And it's something that needs to be actively looked at and maintained. And in terms of access to the Marianas, even though the access has changed a lot in the past, in the 90s, the Marianas used to have more flight connectivity to many other destinations multiple times a day. And that was the time when the tour group model was more prevalent. And the Marianas also had well-equipped properties and unbeatable natural beauty. And while that natural beauty hasn't changed, the products have become less competitive, and the tour group model is on a decreasing trend overall in terms of profitability for airlines. And in terms of profitability for the destination. So it is something that has changed over time. And I think with improvements to the destination and with development of the destination into a multi-island resort destination, it really could help in terms of improving access and getting more flights to fly into Saipan, especially daytime flights. And if we look at access in general to other destinations that are successful, for example, Fiji and French Polynesia, like I presented in the table earlier, is one of the highest yielding resort markets along with the Maldives. All of these remote island destinations have had to deal with access issues, and Fiji and French Polynesia both have their own airlines, Fiji Airways and Air Tahiti Nui. And these airlines, although they're some of the more successful stories of national carriers, they haven't always been successful stories. For example, Air Tahiti Nui survived 4 years of near bankruptcy between 2011 and 2015. They were helped out with a rescue fund by voluntary contribution from all eligible workers in the region. It's owned by French Polynesia government and some local investors. Fiji Airways is owned by Fiji government and Qantas, and a few other Pacific Island nations that are also served by the airline. So I think the idea is that even though airline business is obviously very volatile business, subject to a lot of factors that are not within control, over the years, it goes through ups and downs, but during downtimes, access is still maintained to these island destinations, and it is the lifeline of these island destinations. And both of these airlines I mentioned have their domestic counterparts that service the remote outlying islands for Fiji and for French Polynesia. And a lot of luxury resorts are located on these remote islands, but aside from that, it's also access for the residents. And it's something that during good times, yes, access is good, but during the bad time, it is also something that needs to be actively maintained so that tourism and also just basic logistics to these island nations could be maintained. And I think that's a topic that needs to be actively looked at for the Marianas. And moving on to inter-island access, once again, also critical for guests to get to Tinian and to Rota, and for all the recommendations that I made today to work. So for Tinian, scheduled ferry service with Saipan and maintaining the flights as they are now would be critical. And for Rota, because it's targeting premium guests, it's going to be critical to have daily scheduled flights with Guam and Saipan, but more importantly, flights that have times that enable seamless connection times with international flights. This is going to be a critical criteria for guests to consider when they are choosing a holiday destination, particularly for guests at the premium end of the market. And for the Northern Islands, the ability to dock yachts and vessels on demand. In terms of a development timeline, in the most immediate term, the most urgent items to take care of and to target are the upgrade and branding of the existing shoreline properties on Saipan. Once again, as I mentioned, Saipan has the largest inventory base of the Marianas, and these are properties that could see the most immediate improvement when tourism returns. When tourists come back to the Marianas, this is the properties that they're going to be experiencing, and the upgrading and branding of these facilities is the basis for the destination to move forward. For any kind of higher end facilities that's going to be developed on Rota, on Tinian, or the Northern Islands, guests are going to be arriving via Saipan, and their experience in Saipan is a critical part of the overall equation. And along with that goes the utilization and cleanup of key disused structures and or incomplete developments on Saipan and Rota and Tinian as well, but most importantly, starting with Saipan. And to start within the year, cleanup of Central Garapan and tourism sites, the revitalization of Marpi into an integrated attraction, and looking at developing other parts of Saipan, for example, Garapan Fishing Base, to offer a better variety of lifestyle amenities that move beyond Central Garapan. And again, I think as we saw in the video earlier, that a lot of efforts are really ongoing and have already been completed in terms of cleanup and revamping. And I think this is a great step in terms of the overall development timeline, particularly items that need to be addressed in the immediate term. And then in the next 2 to 5 years, we could be looking at developments on Tinian and Rota. Both islands already have the infrastructure that's already in place for the projects that's recommended that I highlighted today. For example, for Tinian, they basically revolve around the utilization of existing resources, and projects recommended for Rota are smaller in scale and are also realistic to execute in the short to medium term. And in 3 to 5 years, when tourism fully recovers and air access reaches a stable level where sophisticated luxury tier travelers could get to the Marianas from various hubs in Asia on daytime flights, that's when it is ideal to introduce the development of liveaboard adventure experiences for the Northern Islands, because these customers, they do need to be able to get to the Marianas on reasonable flights, so that the destination is competitive with similar products that's offered in the Maldives, for example. And in the next 5 to 10 years, when more of the Northern Islands are established in terms of the tourism sense, to explore opportunities with small nature-based permanent resorts, and to encourage repopulation of the Northern Islands. And looking at branding and target rate positioning, for properties on Saipan in particular, it is critical to introduce globally established hotel brands more than what the market has currently, to make sure that more brands enter the market and more guests that are part of their loyalty programs are introduced to the Marianas. It also helps the Marianas, again, reach a wider guest base, way more than what the traditional tour operators have been able to introduce the Marianas to. And for Tinian, any larger resort developments in the longer term, it would also be good to have hotel brands attached to them. On the other hand, for Rota and the Northern Islands, because these are smaller niche products, it would be beneficial to have management under niche brands, but it's less critical than the larger properties on Saipan. But for Rota and for the Northern Island projects, association with marketing platforms would be highly beneficial. For example, for niche hotels, there's leading hotels of the world, and for liveaboard products, there's dedicated websites for the marketing and booking of these products that once again would be highly beneficial. Looking at the rate positioning for Saipan with renovation and with branding, there's potential for the key shoreline resorts for the room rate to move towards the $200 mark versus what's been achieved in the past. And that's compared to, for example, shoreline resorts in Guam that are branded, that are achieving a rate of above $200, and the branded renovated resorts in Denarau that are achieving also towards the $200 mark. For Rota, the small resorts with unique settings for villa inventory would be looking at a rate of $200 to $300. And for the Northern Islands, the liveaboard premium products would be looking at around $500. Moving on to looking at community initiatives for the Marianas, really on the island of Saipan, it would be the generation of more employment, providing amenities, and really improving the quality of life for its residents. Also the sale of locally produced products, working with schools, etc., hosting community events. So it's really about improving the quality of life for the large number of residents that live on Saipan. But for Tinian, Rota, and the Northern Islands, a lot of these community initiatives needs to go further, given that these islands are less developed. First of all, any developments would need to be completely self-sufficient, and they need to play a more active role in the preservation efforts and in the improvement of public facilities. Given that these islands are lesser developed, the training and retention of local talent is also going to be critical, and integrating with the smaller community. And in the case of the Northern Islands, in the longer term, encouraging repopulation. And now let's go on to look at the final component of today's presentation, sustainable development targets for the Marianas. In looking at target visitor arrival level, the number one thing is to consider that the Marianas has limited resources, particularly natural resources and labor. And it would be critical to preserve the environment, given that this is what supports tourism in the Marianas in the first place. At the same time, it's important to recognize that the quality of life for residents needs to be improved with development of tourism. Which brings us to the benefits of attracting higher spending visitors rather than just growing the number of visitors. And really, it's about looking at the historical arrival of the Marianas for an estimate of reasonable capacity for existing infrastructure. In addition to that, we also looked at 10 other destinations for their visitor arrivals versus their estimated population versus the land area versus the estimated tourism spending per visitor, which is a key metric that I think the Marianas should be looking at as a comparison. So of these 10 destinations, they can be grouped into mainly 3 groups. The more pristine, which here, as you can see, includes Fiji, French Polynesia, and Palau. And these destinations have around 100 to 500 visitors per square mile. And they've been kept very pristine, which, as you can see, is also reflected in the tourism spending per visitor. With the higher end being French Polynesia, over $3,000, and with Palau and Fiji sitting at around $1,200. Moving on to the destinations that are growing more aggressively, but are not suffering from over-tourism. And starting with Kauai, that sits between the pristine group and the group of Guam and the Maldives. Kauai is really a destination that's emphasized quality over quantity. And when back in 2017, it identified about 1.3 million visitor arrivals to be the limit under which the quality of life for its residents and the experience for visitors are still reasonable. Its visitor arrival to land ratio sits at about 2,500, which is significantly lower than that of Guam and the Maldives, for example. Guam, with 30% of its area leased for military use, the remaining land of around 140 square miles welcomed nearly 1.7 million visitors in 2019. And the Maldives, although it was positioned to be a one island, a one resort luxury concept in the beginning, visitor arrivals was growing quite moderately in the beginning up until about 2007, when it had just under 700,000 arrivals. But this grew more aggressively afterwards, surpassing 1.7 million in 2019. I'm moving on to the destinations in Southeast Asia. As you can see here, Bali, Phuket, Boracay being the extreme example, a 4 square mile island that welcomed more than 2 million visitors. And the government in the Philippines, as you may know, closed Boracay for a couple of months to try and clean it up. But really the damages are very difficult to reverse, that from overdevelopment and over tourism. And you can also see here that with estimated tourism spending, the data is not available for Bali and Phuket, but for Boracay, it is significantly lower than the other destinations listed here at about just $600. For the Marianas, this figure, the estimated tourism spending per visitor, is based on survey in 2011 and adjusted for inflation to 2019 values. And that's really looking at about 850, which there's a lot of room to grow compared to, for example, the next highest destination, Guam, which has a 40% premium over the Marianas. And once again, looking at Maldives, Kauai, Fiji, Palau, and French Polynesia, there's a lot of room to grow in the tourism spending per visitor area. Which brings us to talking about the target volume of visitors for the Marianas. Historically, in the late 90s, the peak of tourism arrivals reached about 730,000. With the aging infrastructure and limited availability of labor for the destination, these are critical issues that need to be recognized. I think it's not realistic to surpass the previous peak unless significant overhaul is made to the infrastructure and to the availability of labor. So given that premise, it's more ideal to focus on growing tourism spending. And as I highlighted before, there's a lot of room to grow, with even with the Marianas being about 40% behind the next highest destination on the list, which is Guam. And in terms of growing tourism spending, opportunities really lie within growing rate, but as well as lengthening the average length of stay. And if we look at the multi-island destination of Fiji, average length of stay is nearly 10 nights. And for Maldives, it's around 6 nights. Once again, there's a lot of room to grow for the Marianas. Which brings us to look at the target overnight visitor arrivals by island. For Saipan, we're looking at a target of about 700,000. Moving on to Tinian, this will be a combination of overnight and day use visitors. At 25,000, it's really looking at just a 5% capture of if Saipan had 500,000 tourists, at the level of 500,000 tourists, a 5% capture would get to 25,000 visitors for Tinian. Again, for Rota, looking at a similar volume of overnight visitors, supplemented by the Northern Islands, which this is accounted for on the liveaboard product. Combined, we're looking at just under 750,000 arrivals for the entire Marianas, and really growing the average length of stay to about 5 to 7 nights. Let's end with looking at some sustainable development issues. Number one being, once again, the importance of preservation. And given that the environment and the natural assets are what supports tourism in the Marianas in the first place, it is important to ensure the sustainability of tourism in the Marianas by preserving the environment and avoiding over-tourism. Ensuring that any new developments and upgrades to existing developments are of high quality, and really preparing the destination for the future. As we can see in this picture, this is Maya Bay in Thailand, which has now been closed for over 3 years because it experienced a lot of damages to the environment from over-tourism, having too many tourist visits. And this is really moving away, the world is moving away from that model of depletion and of tour groups, all traveling at once to a pristine tourism destination, and moving more towards individual travel and FIT travel. And the picture really here shows that there's going to be a shift in the way people perceive travel and that people would like to travel in the future. Research has shown that the general public become more aware of their impact on the environment and would like to travel more responsibly going forward. This is definitely a trend to stay, and the Marianas could really differentiate itself from the destinations in Southeast Asia, for example, by showcasing that it is a sustainable destination. And really now is an opportune and prime time to be looking at turning the Marianas into a sustainable multi-island destination. In the post-COVID travel era, people are going to be looking at safe destinations, particularly for markets in Asia, Japan, Korea, and China. They're going to be looking at a list of safe destinations where its citizens could travel. And I think, for example, Europe is going to be taking quite a long time for travel to be possible for residents in Asia. And that's good news for the Marianas, being a very safe destination, a small community that's done very well in terms of managing COVID. People are likely also going to be, as I mentioned, taking fewer trips, but longer trips, given that it is going to be more difficult to travel with restrictions and quarantines involved. They're going to be looking at making each of their trips more meaningful and ensure that they're great experiences. And really, with the multi-island destination product, the Marianas is in a great position to attract these people by offering a variety of experiences for one trip in one destination. And that really is about providing quality beach holidays for leisure travelers and incentive groups on Saipan. That's going to be supplemented by fun, unique cultural day trip attractions on Tinian. Once again, rounded out by niche rustic luxury retreats for top tier guests looking for special occasion experiences on Rota. And then finally, with true adventure experiences on the Northern Islands. And this really offers a big variety of products that complement each other in one destination. Guests could choose to experience a mixture of different experiences on one trip. And it's really a prime time now to be preparing the destination for this, so that post-COVID, when people do start traveling, the destination is ready. And one of the preparation key components to prepare the destination is establishing an identity, one identity for the entire destination that is clear, simple, and easy to remember. And along with that, creating a website that is going to become a one-stop shop travel website that showcases the entire destination. And a good example to showcase this is the official travel website in Fiji. For Fiji, as you can see here, it categorizes things to do by the type of interest. For example, ecotourism challenges or calmer activities like bird watching, looking at national parks and marine parks. There's also a wish list function, which is great for people who are dreaming about traveling and planning. There's also separate pages for each main area in Fiji that gives it a clear identity within the multi-island destination that has critical information on the different areas and what their specialities are. And most importantly, for each of the service providers, for example, resorts, dive operators, all of these service providers in the entire destination, there's a standardized list of information that is provided by each service provider, and it's presented in a standardized way so that when guests come to look for information, this one website is where they can find all the information for the different operators, and there's a booking button that takes the guests directly to booking functions for each service provider. And really having this as a way to plan and to book everything within the Marianas as a multi-island destination is going to be key. And I'll end today's presentation by looking at some exciting potential itineraries for the multi-island destination. For example, guests may choose to only stay in Saipan for 4 to 5 nights, but arriving for sunset drinks at the hotel. Or they may stay in Saipan for 4 nights and move on to Rota and stay for another 2 nights. Or stay in Saipan for 4 nights and take a day trip to Tinian, and while being there, deciding to stay for 1 night. Or really spending time flying in via Saipan and then moving on to Rota to explore Rota and staying for 5 nights and flying out of Saipan, staying 1 night on the way out. And the ultimate luxury, I think, spending 7 nights flying into Saipan, having a welcome arrival, getting on the yacht and sailing every night to a different island in the Northern Islands, and then coming back via Rota and spending 3 nights in Rota and flying out of Saipan. Therefore, really experiencing all that the Marianas has to offer, some unique experiences that really take the destination past where it has been in the past into the new travel era, offering a variety of different experiences that then can be targeting upmarket guests that take the destination to a new level. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.